All right, today we're going to talk about a guy named Anaximander of Miletus. Now, you might not have heard of him, but this thinker from way back, like 2,600 years ago, came up with some truly radical ideas. Ideas that basically kicked off the first great scientific revolution, and you could say laid the very groundwork for science as we know it today.
So let's start with a really fundamental question. Where does everything come from? I mean, everything. Back in ancient Greece, this wasn't just some philosophical thought experiment. It was the question. You got to remember there's no physics, no chemistry, no science yet. This one single mystery is what drove everyone. How did our world, the stars, us, how did it all come to be?
Well, at the time, you basically had two competing answers. On one hand, you have the traditional explanation, myth. Powerful, kind of unpredictable gods, Zeus throwing lightning bolts, that sort of thing. They made everything happen. But on the other hand, you have the very first philosophers emerging, like Anaximander's own teacher, a guy named Thales, and he proposed something revolutionary, a natural explanation. He said everything at its core is made of water. Now, that was a huge leap forward, but, as we'll see, his big idea had a pretty critical flaw.
Okay, so to really get why Anaxander's ideas were so mind-blowing, we first have to understand the world he was living in. And that was a world completely dominated by myth.
And this is where we really see Anaximander's genius kick in. He looks at his own teacher's idea about water and asks this devastatingly simple question. He says, okay, wait a minute. If everything comes from water, which is, wet and cold, how on earth could it create its opposite, fire? Fire's dry and hot, right? It just doesn't make sense. One would have to destroy the other. The whole theory just falls apart. So clearly, a new answer was needed. And what Anaximander came up with, well, it wasn't just another element like earth or air. No, it was a concept, something so abstract and so powerful it would change the course of human thought forever. He called it the apeiron, the boundless.
Now, this search for a primary, fundamental substance was kind of the main mission for these early thinkers. They had a word for it, the arche. It basically means the first principle, the ultimate source of everything. His teacher, Thales, had said the arche was water. Anaximander, well, he was about to suggest something way, way more out there.
And incredibly, this is the only actual sentence from Anaximander's own writing that survived all these centuries. He wrote that whence things have their origin, thence also their destruction happens. For they give to each other justice and recompense for their injustice in conformity with the ordinance of time. It sounds a little poetic, right? But the idea behind it is profound. He's saying the universe isn't some chaotic battlefield for the gods. No, it's a balanced, orderly system. It's governed by a kind of cosmic justice, an endless cycle ruled by time itself.
And what was the source of this cosmic order? You guessed it, the apeiron. The word literally means without limit or boundless. This was his archaea. It wasn't water, it wasn't fire, it wasn't anything you could point to. It was something else entirely, this abstract, primordial stuff that you couldn't even see or touch.
Okay, so what made this idea so brilliant? Well, the apeiron is eternal and ageless. It's indestructible, and crucially, it's the source of all the opposites, hot and cold, wet and dry. See, because it's not one of the elements itself, it's this neutral, primordial substance, it totally solves that problem of the opposites. It's infinite, it's neutral, so it can be the source of both hot and cold, wet and dry, without being destroyed by either one. It's this eternal, inexhaustible well that everything comes from, and everything eventually goes back to.
Now, this incredibly abstract idea of a boundless source had a surprisingly practical and absolutely stunning consequence. It allowed Anaximander to reimagine the entire cosmos, starting with an Earth that needed no support.
Okay, get this, because this might be one of the most important ideas in the entire history of human thought. Before Anaximander, everyone assumed the Earth had to be resting on something, on water, on giant pillars, maybe even on the back of a giant turtle. But Anaximander said no. He realized that if the Earth is just floating in the center of a boundless infinite, then there's no up and there's no down. It just hangs there, perfectly stable because it's in equilibrium, the same distance from everything else around it. It floats freely because of its, quote, indifference. It needs no support at all. Mind-blowing, right? And he didn't stop there. He came up with his whole mechanical model for the universe. So first, opposites like hot and cold separate out from the apeiron. Then a huge ball of flame forms around the Earth, kind of like bark on a tree.
But then, and here's the cool part, that ball of fire breaks apart into these massive, hollow, concentric wheels of fire, all wrapped in mist. And the sun, the moon, and the stars, they're not gods. He said they're just holes, vents in these wheels that let us see the fire trapped inside. The whole thing is a machine, not a realm of deities.
And he didn't just wave his hands and describe it. He actually tried to measure it. He figured the Earth had a relative diameter of 1 unit. The wheel the moon was on, 18 times bigger. And the sun's wheel, a staggering 27 times the diameter of the Earth. Think about that. This was the very first time anyone had even conceived of the sun not as just some little light in the sky, but as a colossal object, a huge mass, incredibly far away from us.
Here's a perfect, everyday example of his way of thinking. Before, if you saw lightning, what was the explanation? Well, obviously, Zeus was angry. That's the myth. But Anaximander's explanation? He said, no, it's just wind breaking through thick clouds with a flash of light. It's a totally natural phenomenon. For every mystery, he was looking for a physical cause, systematically taking the gods out of the picture.
And Anaximander's incredible vision didn't just stop with the cosmos. It's really his whole approach, his method, that marks him as what we could call the very first scientific mind. I mean, just look at this list of firsts. He published the first prose work ever on nature. He created one of the first maps of the known world, which was a huge deal for trade and navigation. He introduced the gnomon, which is basically a sundial, to Greece, letting them track time and the seasons. And get this, he even came up with an early theory of evolution. He suggested humans must have evolved from some kind of fish-like creature, and his reasoning was pretty solid. A helpless human baby just couldn't have survived on its own in the ancient world.
But maybe his single greatest contribution wasn't any of these specific ideas. It was his method. You see, the old way of doing things was you either just accepted what your teacher said, no questions asked, or you just flat out rejected it. Anaximander started a whole new tradition. He would carefully study his teacher's idea, appreciate it, and then he'd question it and try to improve it. And that process, that detailed appreciation followed by a critical improvement, is the absolute bedrock of all science.
So, let's wrap this up. What is Anaximander's enduring legacy for us, all these thousands of years later? Honestly, it's almost impossible to overstate. He didn't just give us a few new ideas about the world, he gave us a completely new way to think about it. The famous 20th century philosopher Karl Popper put it best. Talking about the idea of a free-floating Earth, he called it one of the boldest, most revolutionary, and most portentous ideas in the whole history of human thinking. And he's right. That one idea of the Earth just hanging there in space went against thousands of years of human intuition. It took an incredible leap of pure, abstract, rational thought. And really, that's the crucial thing to take away from all this. We often think the first scientific revolution was Copernicus or Newton, but you can make a very strong case that it was actually Anaximander. That radical shift, away from supernatural myths and towards explanations based on natural laws and observation, that is the moment science was truly born. In the end, Anaximander taught us to look beyond what's right in front of our faces, to question our deepest assumptions, and to imagine a universe governed by rational, understandable principles. He pushed past the limits of his own world to think about the boundless. And that really leaves us with a big question for our own time, doesn't it? What is the next boundless idea, the next apeiron that's out there just waiting to change our world?